Talk to any comic creator, and they'll tell you that they grew up, in many cases, reading a lot of the indies, books like Doom Patrol or Sandman, Shade the Changing Man, Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, and that they really want to write stories like that in the big time, in the big leagues, when they get into comics. The problem with that is that you need the other stuff too, and it creates an interesting discussion. Let's talk about that. Hey everybody, this is Perch on a rainy, aggressively rainy Seattle day. I'm sure you can hear the rain probably there in the background. This is either super annoying or it's nice memories of cozy rain. So everybody can just kind of snuggle up in front of the fire, listen to this video. Nobody in the world will be doing that. But anyway, um, I hear this time and time again. If you talk to creators, you read interviews, you really listen to the influences a lot of writers have. They'll tell you in many cases that they love the more alternative or the more obscure books. You see people saying, I really, really liked Doom Patrol, the Grant Morrison work, some of certainly Neil Gaiman and Sandman and Alan Moore, and they'll list off these books that are, they're good books. I mean, they're comics with kind of very deep, very different storytelling going on, and there's nothing wrong with them. They're good books. They're remembered as timeless and great classics in many cases for a reason. But the only problem with that is that in a lot of cases, these books and the style does not match well to the mainstream. And back in the old Marvel days, where you had like backup features in What If or Marvel Age, and they do little comedy things like What If, you know, there was one that was like, what if the Sandman, what if Neil Gaiman wrote Spider-Man? And they proceeded to do a very over-the-top, kind of introspective, psychedelic, trippy Spider-Man. And that was funny. It was funny for a reason, because it was clear that those two styles didn't merge. But what happens when you get a lot of comic writers who are kind of classically trained in the more alternative or obscure comic books, and now suddenly they are writing Spider-Man or Batman or Superman or some of the core titles? Well, I think that David Lynch, movie director, I really love David Lynch. I like what he does. I think if you look at David Lynch's films, for me, I love what he did with Twin Peaks. I like Lost Highway. I liked Mulholland Drive. I like some of his more obscure stuff on top of that. I think probably the film I liked the least was Dune. And the reason I like that the least of his work is because it felt like it was trying to cram his style into something that wanted to also be a kind of a big budget blockbuster type film. It didn't work. And I still like Dune. I had nothing wrong. It's a good movie. Nothing wrong with the original. But you could tell it was David Lynch kind of out of his element. David Lynch being a little bit restrained in what he wanted to do, what he was comfortable with, and what his style talked about. So if you take that same analogy to comics, and you take, say, Alan Moore, and you say, okay, Alan Moore, we want you to write the Avengers, and you're going to need to do at least one event series with a bunch of crossovers, and you need to work with corporate and marketing to make sure we're doing the right things to promote this issue, and we have variant covers and all that. I just think Alan Moore would blow his brains out at such a concept. I think that would be so against kind of his style, the way he likes to work, the way he likes to write, that you would get a very nonsensical event. I think if you look at Final Crisis from DC, which was the Grant Morrison event, kind of the first and only big Grant Morrison led event, you will see the first couple issues are pretty straightforward, where we have the seeping threat of Darkseid, the New Gods, and people going to be killed, and Granny Goodness being reincarnated in the Green Lantern troop at the time, and there are some, the Alpha Lanterns, that's what it was. There's some really cool concepts in there, and the first three issues read pretty good, pretty straightforward. Definitely felt like a very big looming sense of threat. And then right about the time Darkseid takes over the Earth, and you get the Wonder Woman, Catwoman, Batwoman, Giganta. I think they're part of the Granny's Furies, and they're brainwashed into Darkseid. They've seen the anti-life equation, And from that point on, the series gets super bizarre, up to the point where you've got Superman fighting a vampire at one point, and I mean, it just goes largely. I mean, it depends on your point of view. Minnie said it went off the rails, and I think if you're trying to give a description of a comic event going off the rails, I think Final Crisis is a pretty good one because you do get a pretty straightforward event, and then you get bananas. And again, I happen to like the bananas. I thought that was kind of fun, but it definitely there was a turning point where the series was not selling as well, and people were like, "What the holy hell is going on?" I thought Darkseid was a big threat, but we got a vampire, and we've got it just got very weird. So I think that it's an example, though. Grant Morrison tends to have a very different, more independent storytelling technique. I think Alan Moore would be several degrees beyond that. And I think some of it, like Peter Milligan, has done some more straightforward, more mainstream stuff. But you can clearly see it as his comfort level is in kind of the more offbeat, the ecstatics or the Shade the Changing Man type story. So it's interesting if you look at comic creators, you look at their influence, and you have a lot of people, writing now the Punisher and Spider-Man and the Hulk and a lot of these stories, and their background is not the Dark Phoenix saga. It's not kind of George Perez style, big Marv Wolfman style. It's not that. It's more of kind of these alternative creators. What does that do for comics? And are we seeing somewhat of a result of that where comics have slipped into a little bit more of kind of the talking moments, introspection, some of the narrative has been lost? Because I think that if you're talking about a big budget ish comic, you're talking about, like, say, the Avengers. The Avengers is the Avengers kind of precisely because it is like a Michael Bay movie. It's widescreen and it's designed to be kind of a bunch of talent coming together. Doesn't mean you can't tell a more down to earth human story in the Avengers, but it's really the Avengers is geared to be the Avengers. Much like Sandman was geared to be Sandman. You wouldn't want to take Sandman's style and put it into the Avengers. It would feel very off-putting. Just like if you wrote, you relaunched Sandman and you had it, with art by Rob Liefeld and written by, oh, I don't know, Scott Lobdell. I mean, that would be a very weird Sandman. That would be, I kind of like to see that now, just kind of describing it. But I just think nobody really wants to see that like that. So all in all, it's an interesting thing we're watching with comics right now. You don't see a lot of comic creators coming out and just saying, kind of wearing their action movie creds on their sleeves and saying, yeah, I'm here to do big budget action movie big things with the big budget, the Spider-Mans and the Batmans and all the rest. And maybe that's why we got a long arc dealing with Batman's kind of neuroses and his feelings on father issues and other things. Maybe that's part of why. Just saying. No, I don't know, but there's something there. What do you think? Do you think that the influences that writers and creators have had are starting to show up in books? And do you see this subtle shift from creators being more influenced by the more indie and the more obscure rather than more mainstream concepts, and how that doesn't always gel very well with mainstream comics? Leave me a comment below. Let me know what you're thinking and would love to hear your thoughts on the matter. Like and subscribe if you don't mind. Subscriptions are very much appreciated. And you can follow me on Twitter at Comic Perch. And take a deep breath. Thanks for listening.